Now I got to get to the broken window theory. I believe that we're going through it. I believe I'm living it at Eastern Market. I bought a condo there about 5 years ago, felt good for about 3 years. Now I promised my wife after Votorama, or when we get out of here at midnight, I will not walk home. It's a 15-minute walk that now feels different. And it's because local mayors and town councils have lost sight of the fact that I believe the broken window theory is real. And I believe where we proved it, someone who's up for nomination in Baltimore, former Baltimore mayor, over 50% African-American population, elected a white mayor in the form of Martin O'Malley because they were fed up with what they were experiencing in Baltimore. And by stepping up, he reduced crime, and you could debate the number, but by about 30%, as much as 42%. And it wasn't because he was letting people get a pass on jaywalking or anything else. He was holding people responsible and drawing the margins around what was acceptable behavior. Mr. Cook, do you believe in the broken window theory? Ms. Scheer, or swear to you? I'll get that if you want me to.
I believe it is one of a number of theories that is helpful to understanding crime.
I firmly believe that the resurgence of crime that we're seeing, the feeling that I have now in Washington, D.C., has more to do with people mixing up Dr. Cozy Gay. I believe that people deserve forgiveness. You are a lot further along in your faith journey than I am in forgiving mass murderers and a number of other people, but good on you for being there. But hopefully we can both agree that these mass murderers need to redeem themselves while they spend the rest of their lives in prison when we're talking about those sorts of offenses. But until we start recognizing that our communities are less safe, governor's orders taking away guns like New Mexico are forcing more people to buy guns. Gun ownership is at an all-time high now, and it's going to get higher if you keep doing this kind of crap, Governor from New Mexico. We need people to sit around the table and act like adults, go back and have unpleasant conversations with people that are in our parties, but get to the table and solve problems, and we're not going to do it by talking about take all the guns away or give them all guns. And we're not going to do it by making any of this increase in crime and reduction in safety in these communities excusable. Whether it's Chicago, Charlotte, New York, Portland, doesn't matter. We all know what safe feels like, and you can't tell me you can walk the streets of San Francisco at night now and feel safe. Local electeds, state electeds, everybody else need to recognize they have a responsibility to the people of those communities to make them safer, and they are going in the wrong direction now. And gun violence is only one piece of the puzzle. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are at yet another hearing called by Democrats on gun control. Understand that today's Democrats in the Senate, these are not your father's Democrats. There are no moderate Democrats left in Congress. Today's Democrats, when it comes to guns, their objective is to disarm law-abiding citizens. They simultaneously embrace policies that release violent criminals from jail. They're not interested in locking up murderers. They're not interested in locking up gangbangers. They're not interested in locking up violent criminals. Instead, they systematically support policies that release violent criminals. By the way, if you are hesitant to believe me when I say this, perhaps you'll believe the mayor of Dallas. The mayor of Dallas, Eric Johnson, who's a friend. He's a lifelong Democrat. He's African-American mayor, elected in Dallas, been a Democrat his whole life until just recently. He left the Democrat Party and became a Republican. Now, let me read you why Mayor Johnson became a Republican. Quote, "Unfortunately, many of our cities are in disarray. Mayors and other local elected officials have failed to make public safety a priority or to exercise fiscal restraint. Most of these local leaders are proud Democrats who view cities as laboratories for liberalism rather than as havens for opportunity and free enterprise. Too often, local tax dollars are spent on policies that exacerbate homelessness, coddle criminals, and make it harder for ordinary people to make a living. And too many local Democrats insist on virtue signaling, proposing half-baked government programs that aim to solve every single societal ill, and on finding new ways to thumb their noses at Republicans at the state and federal level. I have to say to an ordinary person, the political ideology of today's Democrats makes no sense. Why your priority is disarming a law-abiding citizen but not going after the violent criminal. And to be clear, it is the radical left that advocates abolishing the police and defunding the police. And when I say there are no moderate Democrats left, the Biden administration has nominated not one, not two, but three of the leading advocates of abolishing the police to senior positions at the U.S. Department of Justice. Every single Democrat on this committee voted to confirm every single one of them, but not just on this committee. Every single Democrat in the United States Senate voted to confirm all three of the Biden nominees, including Rachel Rollins, nominated to be the U.S. Attorney in Massachusetts, one of the leading advocates of abolishing the police, as a local prosecutor. She put out a list of violent crimes that she wouldn't prosecute. You know what? We're not having a hearing on the impact of Soros prosecutors releasing violent criminals from jail. We're not having a hearing on carjacking in Washington, D.C., because the Democrat City Council lowered the penalty for carjacking, lowered the penalty for murder. We're not having a hearing on Congressman Henry Cuellar, a Democrat from Texas, who was carjacked in Washington, D.C. at 9:30 at night. We're also not having a hearing on the Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots across the country, because to Democrats, when stores are being looted, when police cars are being firebombed, when police officers are being murdered, that's not a crisis if they agree with the ideology of the criminals. Instead, their objective is they want to take away the firearm from the single mom who's taking the subway home at night, who that is the only prevention she has against the violent criminals that the Democrats are unleashing. And by the way, to give you an underscoring of it, look, we have a mental health crisis in this country. I've repeatedly introduced legislation to improve school safety, to invest to double the number of police officers in schools. Democrats objected. To invest $15 billion in mental health counselors in schools. Democrats objected. Their priority is not stopping the criminals. Their priority is disarming law-abiding citizens. And by the way, they call it a public health crisis because they want to put supposed experts in charge of disarming you. The Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights is not a public health crisis. What is a public health crisis is the crime rates that are skyrocketing because Democrats keep letting murderers and violent criminals out of jail. But, Dr. Rainey, let me ask you a question in terms of public health. Right now today, what's the leading cause of death for Americans age 18 to 45?
I believe that it's opioids.
It is drug overdoses. Last year, more than 100,000 Americans died of drug overdoses. 70% of that came from Chinese fentanyl that is flooding across our southern border because this administration has opened up our southern border to 8.6 million illegal immigrants, has enriched the drug traffickers. Do you think, Dr. Rainey, that fentanyl flooding across our open border on the south that has killed collectively 100,000 overdoses last year, do you think that's a public health crisis?
Absolutely. Synthetic fentanyl is a major crisis, and Senator Reid from my home state of Rhode Island has been a leader in trying to stop the supply of synthetic fentanyl.
Except he hasn't, because Senator Reid, along with every other Democrat, supports Joe Biden's open borders, because when we try to secure the borders, they block it over and over and over again. And the criminals who come across, who are taking people's lives, that is because the Democrats refuse to enforce the law.
Senator Cruz, equally important is harm reduction to ensure that those who use opioids have access to things like Suboxone or buprenorphine and methadone to help so that they don't use illicit substances off the street. Thank you.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much. Let me welcome Dr. Rani back here and thank her for all of her good work in Rhode Island. Dr. Rani, did you have occasion in the emergency rooms of Rhode Island to treat gunshot patients?
I did.
And did you have occasion to observe the difference between gunshot injuries from what you might call regular ammunition versus gunshot injuries from essentially weapons of war, where the projectile, the bullet, travels at particularly high speed as it hits the human body?
It's difficult to know in the emergency department what type of ammunition is used. We have seen an increasing number of patients with multiple gunshot wounds at once, which is obviously much more difficult to save.
What are the what is the experience like of the ambulance pulling up into the bay and somebody coming into your hands with gunshot wounds, particularly multiple gunshot wounds, and perhaps, if you can identify it, even high-speed projectile AR-15 type gunshot wounds?
So when we get an alert from EMS that they're coming in with a gunshot wound, which we often but not always do, we mobilize not just emergency physicians, but also trauma surgeons, social workers, medical students, respiratory therapists, and so on. So there's radiology techs. There's somewhere between 15 and 20 folks who go into a room. We mobilize blood supplies in order to have that at the ready. Bring a lot of different equipment ranging from chest tubes to the tools that we use to crack a chest if needed, and have these standard algorithms that we follow as we take care of a patient. Sometimes those are successful. Often they are not. The likelihood of saving someone's life depends on both where they are shot and how many times they are shot. I have seen, again, although I cannot identify types of ammunition or types of firearms in the emergency department, that's not my training, and we don't know that at the time. I have seen organs shredded, aortas bisected, and obviously have seen folks with gunshots to the brain as well.
Suffice it to say that knife wounds and beating injuries are customarily easier to treat than gunshot wounds, and particularly multiple gunshot wounds?
That is correct. I'll also say that another senator made a point about suicide. Most suicide attempts we can also save. Suicide attempts by a firearm are almost universally lethal.
And not to belabor the point too much, but have you ever witnessed multiple injuries by musket, which was the firearm of choice at the time the Second Amendment was drafted?
I don't know that I've ever seen a musket wound.
Yeah. And I think the founders may well have had enough common sense to understand that in the time it takes to reload a musket, if somebody were going berserk in a tavern or at a musical performance, there'd be plenty of time to intervene, and that something categorically different takes place when an individual has access to weapons that either are or can be configured to fire rapid fire and to fire ammunition of an entirely different and more destructive nature because of the speed with which the projectile flies. So thank you for being here. So sorry we lost you to our Connecticut neighbors, but thank you for your service in Rhode Island, and I'm glad you still tell everybody that you're a Rhode Islander.
Still my home address, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Well, I'd like to say a word to particularly those at the witness table, but especially those with white coats. Now you've seen it. You've seen the debate in the American political scene over something from your perspective that seems so obvious. I would imagine if your professional responsibilities take you into a surgery or a treatment room for a gunshot victim, that after it's over, when you finally get a chance to relax for a moment with a colleague, you think, What are those politicians thinking? Why don't they take a look at what we're seeing every single day in virtually every hospital across America? And why don't they do something? Well, there are 2 or 3 different approaches, as you probably noted and listened to the senators ask their questions. I can recall one approach. I was a member of the House. It was almost 30 years ago. It's a long time. 30 years ago, and along came a new narcotic called crack cocaine. It scared the hell out of us. It was a form of cocaine, but it was a form that was dirt cheap, highly addictive, and devastating to pregnant women carrying babies. We decided to do something. We passed the drug bill. What we did was this. We got tough. I mean, really tough. We increased the penalty for crack cocaine over powder cocaine by 100 to 1. 100 to 1. What you could hold in your hand could put you in prison for the rest of your life. And that was our answer to it, to finally put an end to it. Well, what happened? Exactly the opposite of what we expected. The price of crack cocaine on the street went down instead of up, and the use of crack cocaine in our country went up instead of down. Then we filled the federal prisons for almost 20 years, primarily with African-American defendants who were sentenced to long sentences, sometimes over 20 years, for that handful of crack cocaine. Ultimately, we came to our senses, at least partially, several years ago, and reduced it from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. Now, let me add, from a pharmacological viewpoint, there is literally no difference of the impact of crack cocaine on your system over powdered cocaine. But we were getting tough, really tough. Finally, under President Donald Trump, I mean that, under President Donald Trump, he signed a bipartisan bill that Senator Grassley and I co-sponsored called the First Step Act, which basically said we're going to take away the mandatory minimum aspects of some of these provisions relating to narcotics. So this debate's been going on as long as I've been in Congress. We've learned and we've forgotten, and we've learned again and forgotten again, and that's what we face today. To think that people don't recognize what guns are doing to America just is amazing to me. When that fella got up on the roof of the business in Highland Park, Illinois, in 60 seconds he fired off 83 rounds. 83 rounds from a military assault weapon. Tell me that the average American needs a military assault weapon to protect themselves or their family. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. Whatever my view of the Second Amendment, it didn't include anything even envisioned by our founding fathers that looked like an assault weapon. So the question is, will we do anything as a result of these hearings? Some of you as witnesses have expressed a weariness that we keep returning to this topic. It is intentional. It's not accidental. I'm coming back to this topic as long as it is a threat to America, and it's certainly a threat. My special guest from Chicago, thank you for coming. Thanks for what you do with your lives. You don't give up on people, and that really makes a difference. You're turning lives around. We've got to do more of it. So at this point, we've learned that hospital and community-based violence programs, violence prevention programs, partnerships with law-abiding gun owners, and more, all steps that can prevent firearm injuries and deaths. It bears repeating that we're going to continue to tackle this topic because that is why we were sent here. That is the province and responsibility of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The hearing record is going to remain open for 1 week for submission of materials for the record. And with that, the Senate Judiciary Committee stands adjourned. Thank you.